Well, ladies and gentlemen, it is our understanding that these microphones pick up voices in an effective way, but you would know better than I if that's true. It seems good. Okay, and since no one, what's really more important is that people hear you. Could you just tell us about the weather today? Could you just say what the weather was like today?
Oh, it's beautiful Colorado spring weather, and I hope you can hear me.
Yeah, all righty, good. Well, that...
And I'm coming a little closer.
Well, this is this little
Is this
stinky thing.
the microphone right here?
Yeah, uh-huh.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
So,
Please do wave or something if you cannot hear me. I won't take offense.
So Len, you're okay now? Is that? So some people here will remember the misfortune of the McPhee microphone, where the last Stegner Award, where everyone could hear me clear as a bell, but could barely hear him, and that was not the right allocation of sound equipment. So, okay, well, it wasn't until the end that I thought, maybe we should change mics, and for heaven's sake. So I will, if you are having any trouble in the back, then I will instantly give up my microphone and go elsewhere. Okay, so I'm Patty Limerick. As you all have heard me say, I imagine I have the best job on the planet, and this would be one of the nights in which that is so evident. It doesn't need to be pointed out because I am on the best company on the planet right now. I would like to, as always, to thank the Center of the American West staff, Honey Lindbergh, Rodney Iris, Raisa Johnson, Kurt Gutyar, and our most excellent comrade, John Goodman, for helping out in pulling this event together. And I also feel, I have been looking more closely at the Center of the American West mission statement, and there does seem to be a clause about how one of our missions is to bring your clan together from time to time. Uh-huh. So we are really fortunate to have a lot of Kent's relatives at various locations here. And that, if that's not explicitly in the mission statement, that needs to be spelled out. Center board members, we have a number of them, and they will be joining us at when we award the Stegner Award, and also I would imagine some of our certificate students and Center student affiliates. I am not going to read the bio that is in your program. I urge you to consult that from time to time, but I think a lot of the information in that bio will be in our conversation. Mr. Haruf and I will speak together for 25 minutes, and then you'll be liberated and well, you're not unliberated now, you're not. But you will then be invited into the question and answer activities as well, and then we will have a ceremony where we give the Stegner Award. I had a little dilemma with the fact that Wallace Stegner has written so much, so that when I went to find the most excellent quotation where he said that the West, as he cared about it and knew it, was located in small towns where the people stuck, where the stickers were, I went to find that because that was going to be my opening prelude to say that the Stegner Award was so appropriate here since Mr. Stegner had said that, and I couldn't find the damn quotation, so well,
maybe you made it up.
You know, that's an interesting problem because I went through life, and it has such bearing on you. I went through life quoting Eudora Welty, saying that the pathway to the universal leads through the local in particular. Uh-huh. And then, unfortunately, someone said to me, where did she say that? Yeah. And 20 years later, we're still looking. So, so there's a very good chance that I have kind of a ghostwriter position with Eudora Welty and Wallace Stegner, which is so comical that we need to move on to more serious matters now. So I am going to get us going on a few conversations, and for some reason here I just thought that we would get off to a great start if you told about the New Year's Eve compliment, which is a funny place to start, as you'll see, but it carries a lot of meaning.
That'll be fine. Before I do that, though, let me thank you, Patty, in particular, for inviting me here tonight and for this award, and for Al and Carol Ann Olson, who've underwritten this award, and the board members, some of whom you see down front here. Also, I do want to say specifically that my clan is here. My oldest daughter, Sorrel, Whitney, Cheney, Sorrel's daughter, Mela, are there. My former wife, Ginger, my current and presumably last wife, is sick tonight, unfortunately. But if you have to be sick, and it's better to do it in the Moldorado. So she's there tonight. But she's been sick all day long, and she's very sorry that she can't be here tonight. Also, my stepdaughter, Jennifer, is back here with my grandson Henry, and I don't know if I mentioned Mela, my granddaughter is over here as well. So I'm very happy to have them. I have friends here from Salida. I see some of them right back here, and some right over here, and some people from Fort Collins. So I'm very grateful to have reinforcement here tonight. So thank you for coming. And I wanted to say a couple other things. I've been in...
Don't forget your brother.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you. You probably helped me avoid some problems later. My younger brother Mark and his wife Cathy are right back here. They live in Highlands Ranch, so Colorado's pretty well represented. Thank you, Whitney.
Is there any other additions here
Yeah.
while we're, no, okay. Right, then I would just like to accent, I got a little bit distracted by my Stegner quotation, but Carol Ann and Al Olson make these occasions possible, and so that is a special.
I started to say that I've been in classes the last 2 days, and the first one was with Patty and her group, a large lecture class. And it was clear that those students were excellently prepared for my visit. They had read Plainsong and talked about it last week with the help of your PA, Adrian. Is she here somewhere? There she is. What a great job she had done in helping them talk about this. And today I was in Karen Ramirez's class, which is a small seminar class. And I've said before, I doubt that those students know quite how lucky they are, not only to be at this beautiful school, but also to have such teachers as they've had. You'll probably know that about 20 years from now, but it really was extraordinary. Thank you so much for that preparation.
On their behalf.
Yeah. All right, so getting back to the question you asked.
Yeah, it's about the New Year's Eve.
I mentioned before in Patty's presence, so I'm going to say it again at her prompting, that probably the best compliment I ever had as a writer came from a dairy farmer, dairy rancher out in northeastern Colorado. The first book that I wrote, The Tie That Binds, in it there are a couple of paragraphs in which I'm trying to debunk the notion that it's romantic to milk cows. I had made a living for a while one summer milking cows, and during that time, a cow numbered 99, an old raw-boned cow, after she had given birth to a calf, had not, as they say, cleaned out right, meaning that she still had afterbirth hanging on her tail. And so when she came in to be milked that morning, this tail was still full of that and manure, and as soon as I started to try to milk her, she wrapped that around my head. So much so that I couldn't see out of my glasses, and I really was angry after that. So when I came time to write that little bit of description of milking cows, I called on my memory of milking old 99, or trying to milk her, and so I wrote a pretty graphic description of that event. And so one New Year's Eve, I was out at Jim Harper's dairy farm, and we were having a New Year's Eve party, and he and I had both been drinking a little bit, maybe more than a little bit, but in any case, he dragged me out to the kitchen, sat me down at the kitchen table, opened The Tie That Binds, and read those 2 paragraphs that I'd written about milking cows. And afterwards, he now, God damn it, he said, that's exactly right. And so the value to me was that I had convinced an expert that I knew what I was talking about. And of course, that's what you essentially want to do, is to write so well that somebody who is really an expert about that particular aspect of your book agrees that you've got it accurate.
I don't know why I would do this. It's kind of a peculiar track here, but reviews of your books in the national media, often, usually very favorable, seem to me to have sometimes a funny tone to them.
Yeah.
So here's the Washington Post, Richard Tillinist, saying, beginning, what he's going to say is that Plainsong is resonant and meaningful, which is certainly true, and he's totally right about that. But he doesn't just say that. What he says is, surprisingly, what emerges is resonant and meaningful. What is that stupid adverb doing there?
I'm not sure. Of course, I didn't write that, and I have no idea. But I don't know. Whether I'm tempted to go off on a rant here.
That was my hope, really. That was, I actually, maybe I could supplement that a little bit. The New York Times review, Verlin Klinkenberg, very wonderful, very favorable review, which I'm sure had a huge impact. But for whatever reason, this man develops a passion for the word simple. Simple strands of language, he says. I don't know about that. Where things simply are as they are. Simple. I'm so simple, surprisingly. I just am wondering about what's going on with that. And please rant. That would be very delightful.
My rant has to do with the fact that many of us in the middle of this country, in this part of the country, feel a kind of antipathy towards people on the eastern coast and they towards us, I think. And often there's a kind of condescension that I think I detect from people in the East, and particularly in New York. And to me, it's absolutely ill-founded, because I think we know more about New York City and about New York than they know about Colorado, and certainly more than they know about eastern Colorado, the plains of Colorado. And so I think in some ways they're writing out of ignorance. And perhaps he's surprised that somebody who is so foolish as to get born out in eastern Colorado would write something semi-meaningful. I don't know what he's getting at. But the word simple, in some ways I don't take offense at that, because I am trying to write in a way that is direct and clear and unadorned and plain, and with the belief that if someone writes that well enough, you can still write beautifully. Now, I'm not saying that that's what I've done, but certainly Hemingway and somebody like Raymond Carver both had talked about trying to write in such a way that you reinvent the language this very morning, so that you are not falling prey to the old, worn-out phrases or uses, but that you are paying such close attention to every word that it becomes as if it were minted just this morning. And that's certainly my hope, and if that makes it simple, okay, well, let it be that way. But I certainly want to write in a way that is direct and plain, anyway.
The process of that writing, process of producing that writing, does not seem simple from your narratives of that. So could you talk about your deliberate, carefully paced progression towards becoming a published author?
Sure, I can talk a little bit about that. And this is not new to anybody who's involved in the arts, but I've been trying to write now for, almost 50 years. And I had no idea as a kid that I wanted to write at all. I went off to college thinking I wanted to be a biology teacher. Once I got into American literature classes, particularly American novel classes, and I had always read a lot, but not read particularly wonderful writing. And once I discovered Faulkner and Hemingway, those two giants of American fiction in the 20th century were so important to me that I was shocked by what they could do on the page. Believe it or not, they changed my life. I knew from that time on that I wanted to do something that had to do with literature. And not that I wanted to write it, but that I certainly wanted to read it and talk about it and think about it. So when I came out of college, I was trained to read and write and talk about literature, but to do nothing else. I had no teaching degree, nothing like that. So I delayed having to go to work, really, by going into the Peace Corps. And I was in Turkey for a couple of years. And while I was in Turkey, then I began to try to write some fiction myself. And I wrote some short stories in the evenings. And as I've said before, they were meager, imitative, reductive little things. They were just awful. And but I kept at it a little bit. And eventually I was allowed, sort of on probation, into the Iowa Writers' Workshop at Iowa City. And I moved out there in February and got a job as a janitor. And later on, my wife and Sorrel came out. And I told them, I went up to the Writers' Workshop and I said, I'm here and I hope you'll let me in. And I think they were so surprised that somebody would move to Iowa in the middle of winter that they finally did. They did let me in, sort of, I think, on probation. And I have to say, I think it's fair to say that I made progress, and by the second year I got a fellowship, and that made things much easier. All right, so that, I was about 30 years old then. From then until I was 41, I wrote as often and as hard as I could and published absolutely nothing. It was not until I was 41 that I published anything. So all that time I was trying to learn my craft, also to make a living so that my kids could eat. They got a bad habit of wanting to eat 3 times a day. And so anybody in the arts knows how difficult it is to try to make a living while you're also learning your craft. You're not a plumber or a carpenter getting paid to learn your craft. You have to figure out how to do that on your own. And so time became absolutely critical to me. So when I finally got a job teaching out in northeastern Colorado, I don't know if any of you have ever heard of the school district Lone Star. It's between Yuma and Sterling. There's no town there, there's no gas station, there's no houses there or anything. It's simply a school district all in one building. When I taught there, K through 12, we had about 50 kids. And I taught there for 7 years. But the value of that for me, aside from being with those country people, was that I got paid in the summer not to do anything else but to get ready to go back to school in August. So I wrote the first book that I did write in those 3 summers. And so I guess the point of all this is time became absolutely essential to me, and I became ruthless about the use of my time. And so in those mornings in the summer, I wouldn't do anything but write. And so what I tell my students is something that I've told myself all along. You have to believe in yourself despite the evidence. And I had plenty of evidence to the contrary, and so it became absolutely important to me to, writing takes a lot of confidence, and you've got to, I think of myself as having kind of like a little pilot light, and you have to tend to that light regularly, every day if you can, or it'll go out. And if nobody else sees it or nobody else believes in it, it doesn't matter as long as you do.
I know that I imposed this on you several times, but I love it every time. Could you tell about the value of a ski cap to a writer?
Oh, you're after... I've already said, I guess, that I'm sorry I ever brought it up, but I did write an essay. The New York Times at one time had a series called Writers on Writing, and they asked me to write something about writing. And so I confess that at some time in my life, I began to put a stocking cap on my head while I write and to pull it down over my eyes. And the long story of that is that when I wrote the first book, The Tie That Binds, I wrote on an old manual typewriter. The second book I wrote on a computer in the 1980s. The computers were available by then. But when it came time to write the Plainsong, I wanted to go back to a manual typewriter because I preferred that, and I'm getting away from it. I miss keys, I miss the paper, I miss the tactile connection with that. So I decided to go back to a manual typewriter, and this old favorite yellow paper that I used to have, and I decided to shut my eyes while I did this, to write every scene with my eyes shut. It may sound crazy, it probably is crazy, but the reason for that is I was trying to teach myself again not to be stopped by thinking I had to write a perfect sentence. If you get yourself in the predicament or in the condition of thinking that you have to write a perfect sentence, even somebody like Shakespeare sounds amateurish or maudlin or awkward. And so if your eyes are shut, it forces you to write that sentence and go on and to get it down. And so my habit has become to write every scene with my eyes shut. Sometimes I put a stocking cap over my eyes to make sure I keep my eyes shut. And so my discipline is to stay at the typewriter writing that one scene until I have that scene finished, and then I can move or get up if I want to. But the challenge is to keep whatever is spontaneous and natural in that first draft when I'm starting to rewrite that over the next week or two. But it's a way of forcing myself to move on and to keep going. Yeah.
The question about place and region, this I thought was a zone of awkwardness between us, but I don't know that it is. But I had read several things in interviews with you that did make me a little anxious about the evening, because if somebody says, well, as a Western writer, you're out of the chute right away saying, not a Western writer, not a regional writer, and that's not, so I thought, well, that's not going to go well tonight for the Center of the American West, but I feel now, well, why don't you explain why I'm no longer traumatized by that?
Okay. Well, because you're a kind person, that's why.
Well, no, I don't know that that's the case.
My objection to being labeled a Western writer is that the same objection I think that Flannery O'Connor and Eudora Welty and William Faulkner would object to being called a Southern writer if you say they're only a Southern writer, or if you say that I'm only a Western writer. I am a writer who lives in the West. I feel absolutely at home in the West. This is where I belong. I want to live here. I choose to live here. And I want to write about people who live in the West. But I want to believe, too, though, that the people I write about and the issues I write about are not exclusive to the West. That surely in Boulder, as in Denver, as in Holt, Colorado, as in Paris, France, as in London, there are pregnant teenage girls who need somebody to take them in. Surely in Boulder, there are lonely old women who are dying without comfort and without connection to anybody else. Surely in Boulder, there are lonesome old men who would benefit from being connected to anybody, including a 17-year-old pregnant girl. So that those people, those conditions, I want to believe are fundamental and universal rather than simply Western or simply Northeastern Colorado issues. And so I get a little bit, annoyed if I'm called a Western writer, implying that I'm only a Western writer. So that's my rant about that.
Totally at peace. I'm totally at peace with that. The word home, you don't really struggle in placing yourself with a sense of home.
No.
You know where that is.
I think I do, yes.
Which is where?
Which is, well, Colorado generally speaking. Even though my wife and I live now in the mountains in Colorado near Salida, the kind of response I have in terms of geography, in terms of landscape, is most intense when I get back on the plains. When I drive out to eastern Colorado, particularly in Yuma County, where I lived for much of my childhood and later on where I taught, I have a spiritual and an emotional, psychological response to that terrain that I have nowhere else in the world, and I've been quite a few places. And I usually say about the plains of Colorado that they're not pretty, but they're beautiful if you know how to look at them. And you do have to know how to look at them. You have to know what you're seeing. I've been there with other people who have come there from outside of that area, and they don't know what they're looking at, and they find it boring and dull to look at the plains. But if you know how many cuttings of alfalfa somebody has done on his field, if you know what a corn farmer has done in terms of center pivot irrigation, if you know that these are weeds and this is grass and so on, all those kind of things. If you know something about the cattle that you're looking at, all those things are fascinating to you, and you can almost not drive through them without stopping to look at them. And so I'm not talking about sunsets and sunrises. I'm talking about the specific details that make up that landscape. So that to me is what makes up home for me. Home is where the heart is, probably. And that's certainly where, in a large sense, my heart is.
So the reporter said, if you love the plains, why are you living in the mountains, I guess?
Well, again, yes. One time a woman came out from the New York Times and said, well, if you say you like the plains so much, and you write about the plains all the time, how come you don't live there? And my smart-ass remark was, well, we live in the mountains because my wife wants to live in the mountains. And so when Cathy saw that in the paper, you could imagine the kind of hell I caught. And she said something, and I think I'm quoting her directly. She said, oh, I made you live in this ratty-ass cabin up here against your will. And the next time that question ever came up, I said that I live in the mountains because it gives me perspective on the plains. And well, she thought that was BS too, but she accepted it.
Having picked out some of the reviewers now, I will say I am really struck by how frequently the word grace appears. And you are a child of a minister,
Yeah.
and none of your characters go to church.
No.
No. And yet the concept of grace and redemption seems to be coming out of a framework that's not really, I don't even know what this term means anymore, but secular humanism. It doesn't seem to be that. It seems to be, well, I mean, redemption is not a sociologist term, I don't think of. So could you talk, maybe Plainsong in particular, but how that concept of grace and redemption are working, and really the notion that trouble is at the center of the stories and the plots and responses to trouble, how that figures in this framework of grace and redemption.
Well, I sort of start at the end of that. Fiction, as everybody knows, is about trouble. People in trouble. You try to start a novel with people already in trouble. And so the rest of the novel is an attempt on their part to respond to that trouble. And so that becomes the plot, that becomes the storyline, and it's a cause and effect. One thing leads to another. And hopefully that the troubles that they have and the drama that they go through is more intense as the book progresses. You certainly don't want the most dramatic thing to happen in the first chapter because it would be anticlimactic afterwards. And so there's that. But also it connects, I think, with what you're saying that one time I gave a talk to a large group of people at the University of Nebraska. There was a big auditorium, 600 people or so. And a man came down the aisle when it was time for the Q&A, grabbed up the microphone, and he was very exercised, and he said, "There's nothing religious about this book because there are no scenes set in a church." And I suggested to him that it's possible that there are religious moments that occur outside of a church, that there may be spiritual events that occur in everyday life. And I went on to suggest to him that in Plainsong, people like Victoria Rubidoux, who's without shelter, who needs a family, she's taken in improbably by two old bachelor ranchers. The two little boys, Ike and Bobby, are befriended and mothered by this lonely old woman who is dying of lung cancer up over Main Street in this dark alley. To me, those kinds of gestures on their part, that's a religious act. That's a spiritual moment. Surely in every religion, the idea of giving somebody shelter, somebody clothing, somebody food, if they need that, that's a religious act. And so I reject the idea that there's nothing spiritual or nothing in terms of redemption or grace in these books. Now, I don't want to claim too much for these books, but I do want to think that grace and redemption come in all kinds of guises and not necessarily in the trappings of organized religion.
This is something reminding me, I was at a conference on the nuclear West in Seattle years ago, and it was very disheartening because we were talking about atomic weapons production sites. I was supposed to give the closing remarks, and I turned on the TV. It was a Sunday morning. I just turned on the TV so there would be noise in the background, and it was a religious show that was on. Mm-hmm. And when they broke for a commercial, this is actually literally what happened. Mm-hmm. The host of the kind of panel discussion on Sunday morning said, "Grace and redemption will continue in a moment." It was just, that seems good.
Yeah,
that's really good.
Well, something to count on anyway.
That's right. That's pretty funny. Yeah. So I did not, until actually it was Adrian, my team teacher, was really putting the spotlight for me in our discussions on Maggie Jones, because if you take Maggie Jones out of Plainsong, the bachelor farmers don't know that this could happen to them. And she could be, I hope I will phrase this appropriately, in the hands of the wrong writer, she would be insufferable. She would be a lady going around doing good, who are the worst. I mean, they are, when Henry David Thoreau said something like, "If I knew someone was coming to my house to do me good, I would flee as from the hounds of hell," or something. So that can be really a dreadful figure in a novel or in a neighborhood. But she is a wonder. She is a wonder. And so could you talk about Maggie Jones? And
I'd be happy to, sure. I think all the characters, certainly the major characters in this book, change over the course of the book. But I think in some ways she changes the least because she needs to change the least. She seems to be the one who unites everybody. She certainly knows the McFerrin brothers, and she knows Victoria Rubidoux, she knows the Guthrie family and so on. And she's the one that is at the center of this book. If you think of this book as being sort of a wheel, she's certainly at the hub of this wheel. And I don't think she's a do-gooder, and I don't think she's without warts. I think she's somebody who, certainly she gets mad when Tom Guthrie has an affair that she thinks should have come her direction.
Right.
And she's not at all hesitant about telling him that. And she's not hesitant about telling the McFerrin brothers how they should behave themselves and so on. And she's not hesitant about telling Victoria Rubidoux about how she should respond to these things. So I want to think of her as a woman with an open heart and a good bit of steel in her backbone. And I don't think she's too good, but I think she's a good person.
She's, well, as I say, only in the hands of the wrong author with that. But that's a lucky woman to have ended up in your hands. That was really we should all have such fortune. We've spoken, I don't know, we've talked about it in front of any of the classes. The group, well, a little bit in front of the one class. The bullies are very convincing and very hard to read. And Eventide, probably maybe even more so than the Russell Beckner one. And I was so pleased. One of the students, actually, when we were talking to him yesterday, he said that he had to stop reading and walk away. He was so mad at Russell Beckner. He just had to, and he's just doing an assignment for a class. I mean, ordinarily you put down the book and walk away because you're doing an assignment for the class and you're tired of doing the assignment. But he just could not stand to be in the company of Russell Beckner. And so, and I will say, I can make it through that when the little boy is being picked on the playground and his big sister's trying to help him. I just think, why are you making me do this? Kent, why are you? And each time I read it, I'm as agonized. And I know that you were doing it for the right reasons, though it's very. I mean, I think the reviewers are going, oh well, it's a simple kind of story and so on. I wish it were, for heaven's sake. Those are really hard passages because they are so straight on. So, what's going on?
Well, there's a number of things going on, I hope. But first of all, as a writer, you know that you have to have people who are capable of doing bad things. Mainly because you need them to move the story along, to move the plot along. And so that you need somebody to do something to make somebody else react to that. So they may be reprehensible people, and certainly Russell Beckman would fall in that category, and so would the uncle in Eventide. Yeah, they are unlikable people, extremely so. But as a writer, I like them because I know that they're going to cause something to happen, and somebody has to respond to what they've done. And so when I'm writing those scenes, I hardly even think about what they're doing. I'm just trying to get this down as clearly and as accurately as I can. And only long afterwards, really, do I think about the awfulness of what they've done. Yeah. So I feel of several minds about that. But also, I don't want to paint some kind of a hallmark picture of eastern Colorado, right? I mean, bad things happen out there, just as well as good things happen out there. And if you're going to try to write realistic fiction, which I am trying to do, you have to be realistic about that. And that includes all kinds of people, people like Russell Beckman and Neil.
I'm really close to cutting myself off here, so in a minute or two you're going to have your chance at questions, but I have just a couple of last ones, and really responding to that, or to the portrayal of the complexity of the population. How does eastern Colorado respond to these books?
In a mixed way, I would say. I was just out there in eastern Colorado 2 or 3 weeks ago, and Whitney and Cheney were with me too. And the reason was, believe it or not, a couple of British filmmakers have the idea of making a new film of Plainsong. And they know nothing about the eastern Colorado, but even though they've read this book thoroughly. And so one of them flew out from London and drove out to eastern Colorado. And so my daughters and I met him out in Yuma, and we spent a long weekend showing him around, and then he stayed on, and I had connected him with some other people out there, and he had a great time. But the point is, when I was out there, I ran into a number of people I had used to know. And they're all very certain that what I have done is not to make up anything, but it's simply to do a kind of journalism, a kind of reporting on what their lives were like. Well, in a certain way, I'm complimented by that, to think that they think that I've got it correct. But on the other hand, it's irritating to me to think that that they think that it's simply what happened. Because none of these things, there are no bachelor ranchers out there who have taken in pregnant teenage girls. If there are, I've never heard of them. And so on. And so it's my effort to try to set my stories in a place that I know and to overlay Holt, Colorado over the geography of Yuma, Colorado. The street names and the directions of Bay Street and the direction of the highways, all those are lifted from Yuma, Colorado. But Holt is not Yuma, and the people in Holt are not Yuma. And so, and then I found out from somebody else that when Eventide, or not Eventide, Where He Once Belonged came out, and there's a crime committed in that novel, and he commits the crime against the county. Some people in Yuma, in eastern Colorado, were upset about that. And they told a friend of mine and said, well, he's gonna ruin our reputation. And she rightly said, what reputation? and so there's a kind of a mix of things happening. So anyway, it's a mixed bag.
Well, that was an excellent story. My last question is going to be about children and the portrayal of children. You have said in one interview, I wanted to portray Ike and Bobby without sentimentalism. I think that usually the risk in fiction is the tendency to make children too cute.
Yeah.
And then today in Karen Ramirez's class, you said that Ike and Bobby were children thrown up against a predicament for which they were not going to be ready. So you have never met a stereotype you didn't throw to the ground and dance on. It's a peculiar image, if you want to say.
Thank you.
Yes, but I think maybe, stereotypes of rural people, those are bad, and farmers and so on. But stereotypes of children may be the most encrusted and barnacled, and so the stereotypes of children and what you have done with your child characters.
Yeah, thank you. I hope that's true, and I certainly want it to be true. In writing about children, obviously the risk is to make children too wise, too cute, too adorable, all those things. Kids without warts or without problems. These kids have problems, and what I was trying to do in the case of Plainsong was to portray children in a predicament where the mother has left the family, and so that leaves these kids, in a sense, unprotected, and so they go through a whole range of things, seeing raw, cruel sexuality, meeting an old woman who's dying, being bullied by some teenage boys, seeing a horse die, and seeing an autopsy performed on a horse. And again, seeing an old woman die. So those are the kinds of things that adult would have plenty of trouble dealing with, but now these children are faced with this. And part of what I was trying to get at was that children left unprotected are up against all kinds of things that they are not in the least bit prepared for. And these little boys, I trust their moral character, their moral manners, their moral fiber, if you will, and they are, even though they can't really talk about them, they do respond, I think, in healthy ways, but we don't know what the consequences of that's going to be. But the effort was to try to show these two kids in ways that they talk right to one another, the way little boys would, and to respond to these things the way little boys would. And I have to say that my portrayal of Ike and Bobby has a good deal to do with my affection and my love for my brother Mark, who is here tonight. He and I grew up together. He's a year younger than I am. We don't agree on some things nowadays, but we grew up together with absolute affection for one another, even though we never said so. And I don't think we ever fought. And we we kept our money together, and we lived in the same bedroom and slept in the same bed till we were in junior high. So that kind of portrayal does not seem to me at all unlikely or improbable. Yeah.
Okay, we could now take a few questions from members of the audience. I think we'll be able to hear them, and we'll just restate it for the tape. So, yes, there.
Well, I'm wondering what you think is happening now in these towns, how they're changing when
good question.
so many people are leaving them, so many young people are leaving, so many people with ambition, they can't work there. I just wonder if the feeling of these towns is changing.
So, at the risk of tedium, I'll just repeat it for the,
Yeah, please do.
recording. So,
Sure.
that's exactly what I was mumbling about. I was about to repeat the question. So, so tell us what you're thinking is happening in these towns now. Plains depopulation is much discussed. What's the mood and the prospect there?
Well, I think, did any of you see, many of you must have seen, a year or two ago, National Geographic article about North Dakota, and they antagonized people in North Dakota by talking about how people are moving away from that state and how the state is depopulated and so on. And people, if you saw the next issue, people wrote in with great umbrage about it. But nevertheless, it is true that many small towns in Colorado as well as North Dakota are decreasing in size. I think an example in Colorado would be the town of Haxton. I think Haxton has many fewer people now than it did previously. Contrary to the national drift that way, I believe Yuma, Colorado, has a larger population now than it did 30 years ago when we lived there. I think they have about, 3,500 people there now, and I think maybe they had 2,500 people when we lived there. But let me explain why that is, as so far as I know. Out in eastern Colorado now, there are 2 huge new feedlots. And each of those feedlots have around 100,000 head of cattle. And there are other huge hog operations. And most of the people who have moved newly into that part of the state, many of them anyway, are Hispanic. And why is that? Well, because those people are desperate enough for work that they are willing to do the kind of horrendous jobs that those new things require. So I'm not sure that's a good phenomenon. And I've also been told that in that town that 70% of the kids who go to grade school are eligible for free lunches. That means that, in my understanding, there's a great deal more poverty out there than there used to be. And there's a greater disparity between rich and poor there. And maybe that's true all over the country, but it's certainly true there. So I don't know. I'm no sociologist. I can't tell you why people are moving away from small towns, but surely it has something to do with the opportunity for work and for making a living, and also for a different kind of culture than they get there. But that doesn't mean there isn't many things to be entertained by out in eastern Colorado.
I just returned to this area after living 7 years in Yuma County.
Uh-huh.
And it does take a while to appreciate the beauty of it.
Yes.
But the isolation of it, especially coming from Boulder, it's hard to grasp it. And the people are very nice, but when you're an outsider, you are an outsider.
That's true.
So,
I mean, you really
Absolutely.
are. And I think the young kids' education isn't always promoted unless your family encourages college. Many of the people are hesitant to leave eastern Colorado because they're scared. And it's safe there for them. And there still are some big rich farmers out there, so those people are going to stay and be happy.
given that I have to restate the questions, I'll just say that our friend here lived in 7 years in Yuma. It took her a while to appreciate the beauty. She did find the isolation striking, and she worried a bit about the educational motivation and the openness that the children might be getting or might not be getting. Certain parents would encourage college and others wouldn't. So that's an interesting.
Yeah, is there a question there?
I don't know if there is.
Well, it's just that, you can't paint it good or bad. It's like any other place. There's good things, there's bad things, so, but, you know, it's not the end of the world,
No.
as some
Right.
people think, that the world goes
Okay,
on
the good-
after you leave Denver.
It is not the end of the world, but that, I'm going to tell you what the question was, which is, would you talk about the wind? Because that seems to me such an aspect of life in those areas, and that just has such an effect on the temperament and the soul to be in a place where the wind is blowing so much. And I don't think that you and I have talked about wind. I grew up in Banning, California, where the wind blew all the time. I had long hair. I spent my childhood untangling my hair. That's all I ever did as a child. So I would like to hear your reflections on wind on the plains.
Well, a couple of things first. My sister-in-law, Cathy, out here, lived in Yuma for many more years than I did, and so she could talk more authoritatively about that part of the state than I can. Even I think we share an absolute affection for that part of the world and the people out there too. So I don't mean to suggest that I feel negatively about that part of the world at all. I feel just the opposite. But I'm not blind to its complications either. The wind, it's like, what did Lincoln say? God must have loved the poor people because so many of them are always with us. The wind is always with us on the plains. And you may be interested to know, I had not been out there recently, but if you get north of Lyman now, there are hundreds, maybe thousands of wind turbines out there now. And they have done, at least from my perspective, the absolute right thing. On that bluff overlooking Lyman, there are just masses of them there. And so the wind in that regard is being very important. And of course, windmills, as long as there have been windmills, have been very important. They certainly were important to people who were trying to have water where there was no water. And my grandfather on my mom's side had a sheep ranch and a wheat ranch out in South Dakota, and his windmill provided enough electricity to light one light bulb back in the 1920s.
Wow.
And they had batteries out in the garage that stored the electricity. So wind can be very useful. The weekend we were in eastern Colorado, there was a fire that started for reasons nobody understood or knew, and it burned about 15 miles of stubble immediately. And because it was a very windy day, and they had to evacuate people from that area. And of course, people in Boulder know all about wind too, don't you?
Right.
And so, I don't know.
Well,
In a way, if it's not blowing me down or knocking me down, I like the wind. Really, I kind of miss it. Yeah.
The Indian people outside Banning, the Cahuilla people, I did not know this when I lived there, but I went back there for a conference, and the tribal chairman said the Cahuilla people believe that the wind is the earth breathing.
Ah.
I thought, boy, if somebody could have told me that when I was 5 years old. I mean, what a difference that would have made if I could have thought of it in those terms. Right, in the middle there in the back, yeah.
What do you think shapes feeling at home? Do you think it's, do we internalize the first place, or compositive places, or memory, or possibility, or what? You know, when you feel at home, what do you think that's about?
What is the sensations that come together in that being and feeling that you're at home?
I think all of you could answer that question certainly as well as I could. And we were talking about that in classes yesterday and today about when do you feel at home? When do you know you are home? And I asked that once in a classroom in Illinois where I taught, and a woman who was from the south side of Chicago wanted to know when she knew that she was home. And she knew she was home when she saw a particular billboard on the street corner. That was the limits of her home. That was the beginning of home. Well, what? What did Frost say? Something like, home is where they have to take you in. Home is where the heart is. That's another way of thinking about it. Certainly home is, in a sense, when I return to eastern Colorado, I feel, as I've already suggested, a particular kind of emotional response to it. And it has as much to do with landscape as it do with people or with towns. And it seems to me in not in so many places in the world that that people are not equal to the land itself. We throw up any old thing on the land, and out here in the West, because it's so dry, if we put a footprint down, that's going to stay there a long time unless the wind blows it away. But it's not. We're not like the Midwest. We're not like the East, where grass will grow up and cover it over. Carl Sandburg said that poem about grass, "Let me work, and I'll cover up your mistakes." That's not true out here. And so landscape is so much defined by the amount of water we have. And so, but home to me is memory, is experiences, is the way things look. It is to some degree people, but it's more a matter of appearance than anything to me.
Yes.
Kent, your first experience with going with the film, with Plainsong, was something less than satisfactory, as I recall. You had great experience with the Denver Center for Performing Arts. I'm wondering your reactions moving into another attempt at filming Plainsong.
So Kent was not overly pleased with the film made of Plainsong. The Denver Center for the Performing Arts did a remarkable job, I would think. And now as you move into another film project, is that a bracing and optimistic feeling that you have now, or?
Well, yes, but I think I said to somebody when we were talking about this last night, when I signed an option agreement with a filmmaker on Plainsong, what I did not understand was that producer had the right to sell the rights to somebody else, and somebody else that turned out to be Hallmark. And Hallmark made a movie that was shown on CBS on a Sunday night, and of course they understood very clearly who their audience probably was going to be. And so in my estimation, they dummied down that story completely. They took the sting out of it. Nothing happened between Russell Beckett. I don't even know if he was in the movie. The McFerrin brothers were kind of retarded old men, and they spoke in a way that seemed to me utterly improbable. They had them dressed altogether wrong. There was all kinds of things that was wrong with it, that were wrong with it, and including the fact that they filmed it in Utah, and so when these kids were where the families were supposed to be going into Denver, you could clearly see the outline of Salt Lake City. So you don't have to be a genius to figure that out. And so there were all kinds of things wrong with that. So that when Kent Thompson, the artistic director of the Center for the Performing Arts in Denver, asked if they could make a play of those two books, actually beginning with Plainsong, I had my doubts. And so we met with him and his wife at their house for lunch. And it turned out that his wife was the daughter of people who had grown up in eastern Colorado, and his parents, or this woman's parents, happened to be my older brother's best friends. And so I knew that they knew all about eastern Colorado, and if anybody could make a good play out of that material, then they would certainly try to. And so I gave up my reservations about that. I agreed to it, and I went to quite a few rehearsals. And I probably irritated Kent Thompson no end, who's a really super guy, by following in right after he had given instructions to an actor by saying what I thought they should be doing and how I thought they should be saying these lines. But he was kind enough to ignore that, and they did do a good job with it, and I was pleased with it. And strangely enough, I think these two guys from London do really want to make a real film out of this. And part of the evidence of that seems to be that they sent a guy over here, one of the two guys, from London to actually come out and look at the country and to talk to people and spend a week out there trying to get to know what that country was like. And so that seems to me to be an encouraging sign. But with film, you never know what's going to be any good. Even with the best of will, it doesn't mean that something good is going to come of it. There's too many people involved in it. And commerce has too much to do with it.
does his new novel carry on with the characters from Eventide and Plainsong? And we may not be finding that out because talking about a novel before it comes out is not always the thing to do, apparently.
It is
So
not. The answer is no.
the answer is no. So there we are.
It's set again in Holt, Colorado. It's set in contemporary times, but none of the characters, there's a reference to a previous character, but none of the characters in this new book were in the previous books. No.
Okay, maybe one last question? Yeah.
Do you ever feel compelled to write short stories?
I did write short stories. If you heard the question, did I ever feel compelled to write short stories? I did start writing short stories, and I admire short stories, and I think, you and I were talking about that today, the writer whom I admire the most is known primarily as a short story writer, and that's Chekhov. And so I did start writing short stories, and I published a few, but I haven't written any for quite a long time, and the stories seem to me to occur to me now to be novel-length stories, but in some ways I wish I could write short stories, but I haven't any recently. Short stories are a very different thing, and they require a very different kind of writing, obviously.
Okay. I think we might shift to our, but I will, as we prepared to give this award, I feel an obligation, I guess it's not an obligation, but to quote, this is from Publishers Weekly, a profile of Kent Haruf. The author is surprised, humbled, and gratified by the attention being showered on his novel, this was Plainsong, but he's admittedly dismayed by all the personal attention it is bringing him. So in that cause, we will, I believe, now award the Stegner, confer the Stegner Award. And to do that, we have our custom where we have all the center board members, faculty affiliates, Center American West certificate students, center staff. They come and form a beautiful arc behind us. As you say, they may not be pretty, but they're beautiful. That's not true. They are pretty and beautiful. So they will stand behind us, and then you and I will stand, and I will read this citation.
Okay.
Okay. So.
Anyway, thank you all for coming out.
Oh. Please don't, I don't, oh yes, you're all coming, yes, good, there you are, you're coming, yeah, good, right, yes. Here we are, and this is a brief ceremony. Those of you who might fear this is a long ceremony, it's really very brief. And after we have this ceremony, at that point we will go into maddened applause. We will really go at it for our applause for our speaker. Okay, there we are, center rights, ready? Okay, here is our citation for Kent Haruf for the Stegner Award. While you will fight in the most gracious and persuasive way anyone who calls you a Western or regional writer, the Center of the American West will not surrender the right to celebrate your deep and lasting contribution to the cause of our region's self-knowledge. Having pulled the rug out from under sentimentality and stereotypes, you have given life to the people who have the courage to count each other as kinfolk and who take the risk of believing that trouble is a prerequisite for redemption. Having made the most of the opportunities for observation offered to a preacher's kid, you have rejected the easy way out offered by cynicism. In your novels, the light from the sun and from the stars illuminates the beauty and brutality, the kindness and cruelty of human conduct in Hope, Colorado, located squarely at the intersection of the local and the universal. In the words of Maggie Jones, the force of connection in Holt and the fictive co-founder of the Center of the American West, you're here now. This is where you are. This is where we are in the company of your words and your spirit.
Thank you. Amen. Thank you all. very much. You're more than kind.
Thank you. And there is a reception, and there are, this is what is really important to say about that reception, there are books for sale, and there is an author to sign those books. So take advantage of that opportunity. And then, Senator Wrights, I guess you want to shake his hand or something. The nice lady over there who does the calligraphy. So, but it'll be beautiful. It'll be really nice. Oh, pleasure.
Yeah, I did, but I